My name is Elizabeth Carter. I grew up in a small town in Kansas, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, stories, and secrets. Life in such a town followed a predictable rhythm, moving at the same steady pace year after year. My own life was no different. It was not extraordinary, nor was it particularly eventful. If anything, it was a quiet existence, defined by routines that never wavered. I worked at the local library, a modest building nestled between the town's only coffee shop and a small hardware store. The scent of old pages and polished wood filled the air, and the steady rustle of paper accompanied me throughout the day. My time was spent cataloging books, helping children with their school projects, and occasionally engaging in small talk with visitors who lingered in the reading corner, nursing their coffee as they lost themselves in a novel. There was a certain peace in that simplicity. I was fiercely independent, and I preferred it that way. I had learned early on not to rely on anyone. My skepticism had been shaped by years of watching my mother cling to faith as if it were the only thing keeping her from sinking. After my father abandoned us, she spent countless nights by the window, clutching her Bible with trembling fingers, whispering prayers into the empty darkness. But I had never been one to believe in things I could not see or touch. Faith, to me, was like a fragile thread, too easily snapped under the weight of reality. I put my trust in tangible things, things that could be repaired, held, and understood. A broken pipe? I'd grab a wrench. A flickering light? I'd climb a ladder and fix the bulb. It wasn't pride that drove me, just the knowledge that depending on others had only ever led to disappointment. That night was no different. It was late and the porch light had burned out. With a sigh, I retrieved a replacement bulb and reached for my toolbox. As I stepped outside, the crisp evening air enveloped me in a whisper. The wooden porch creaked beneath my feet as I positioned the ladder beneath the light fixture. This wasn't my first time doing this. I had climbed this ladder dozens of times before, each step familiar beneath my weight. As I ascended, the cool metal groaned softly, but I paid it no mind. Reaching the top, I stretched out my arm, fingers grazing the burned-out bulb. Then, in an instant, something shifted. A moment of imbalance, fleeting but unmistakable, a barely perceptible wobble. Then it happened. My foot slipped, the ladder lurched, and the world tilted. Time seemed to slow as I fell, each second stretching endlessly. The sharp clang of the ladder hitting the porch, the rush of wind against my skin, the sickening impact as my body collided with the wooden floor. Each sensation came in jagged, disjointed fragments, like broken pieces of a film reel. Pain exploded through me, searing and electric, a sensation so overwhelming that for a moment I couldn't even scream. My body had never known agony like this before. But the pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what followed: silence, stillness, a terrifying, all-consuming quiet that swallowed me whole. I don't remember what happened immediately after. Later, they told me that my neighbor, Jim, had heard the crash. He had rushed over to find me sprawled on the porch, my body eerily motionless, his voice cracked with urgency as he called 911, desperation lacing his words. At the hospital, the doctors worked tirelessly to save me. Machines beeped in frantic rhythm, voices barked orders, and hands moved swiftly. My body lay limp on the sterile table, surrounded by bright surgical lights and the sharp scent of antiseptic. But I wasn't there. I don't know how to explain it. It was as though I was watching from somewhere else, standing outside myself, staring down at the lifeless figure on the hospital bed. The medical staff moved around me, their faces drawn tight with focus, but I felt no pain anymore. In fact, I felt nothing. Not fear, not sadness, not even confusion, just an eerie sense of detachment. It was like floating in a dream, one where the world still existed, but I was no longer truly part of it. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't alive, at least not in the way I had always understood life to be. I was also present. I was trapped in a space that defied explanation, existing somewhere in between. Before we continue this amazing journey, I invite you to something special. Join our growing community by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. More stories are coming, stories that will inspire you, touch your soul, and perhaps even change the way you see the world. And here's a special request. Leave a comment with your name and city. In the next video, we will send a personalized message to some of you. We may mention your name in front of thousands of viewers, giving you a chance to shine. Let's build something meaningful together and maintain this connection as we embark on this journey. From the moment I realized I was no longer in my own body, panic overtook me. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I attempted to move, but there was nothing to move. No weight, no substance, nothing to grasp onto. And yet, I was still there, hovering above the hospital bed, watching. The doctors and nurses worked frantically. One of them pressed their fingers against my wrist, shaking their head. Another checked the monitors, their voice drained but firm, as they called out, "Time of death, 11:47 p.m. I was dead. The realization should have terrified me. And yet, it didn't. Not in the way I expected. There was no immediate fear, no sharp agony, just silence. An eerie, all-consuming stillness. It was like floating in the deepest part of the ocean, weightless, untethered. Then, something moved. The sounds of the machines blurred. Frantic voices faded into the background. It was as if I were being pulled. Some unseen force yanking me away, unraveling the physical world around me, transforming it into something else entirely. Darkness, but not the kind of darkness that comes when you close your eyes. This was something deeper, a void, infinite, empty. I couldn't see, I couldn't feel, I couldn't hear. I was simultaneously nowhere and everywhere. Time lost meaning. Then a sound. At first, it was only a faint whisper, distant and indistinct, but it grew louder, swelling like an echo in a vast canyon. Voices, and they were speaking about me. I couldn't understand how they layered over one another, overlapping yet distinct, but every word cut through me, sharper than the last. She never believed. She rejected them. She thought she knew everything. Each sentence penetrated me profoundly, causing a sensation that went beyond mere fear. I realized with chilling certainty that I had no control over what was happening. This force was far greater than anything I could fight or explain. Then I began to fall. Not in the way I had fallen from the ladder. There was no rush of air, no sense of speed, just a sickening pull, dragging me downward in a relentless spiral. The voices did not stop. They echoed relentlessly through the void, accusing, condemning. My mind cried out for it to end, but I had no voice, no power. Then everything shifted, a change in the very air around me. Light. Initially, it appeared as a minuscule speck in the vast darkness. But then it expanded. It brightened. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. This was not just light. It was alive. As it grew, the voices faded, their relentless chorus swallowed by the radiance. And for the first time since I had left my body, the fear that had consumed me began to subside. I wasn't falling anymore. I was moving toward the light, pulled by something stronger than gravity, more certain than anything I had ever known. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a silhouette within the glow, a figure emerging from the brilliance. As it drew closer, details became clearer. This was no ordinary presence. This was something, someone, far beyond my understanding. And in that moment, I knew. Everything was about to change. His robe was pure white, flowing as though woven from light itself. It moved effortlessly, as if carried by an unseen current. His face radiated a brilliance that didn't just illuminate, it seemed to emanate from within him. The glow was both familiar and entirely beyond comprehension. There was no harshness, no condemnation in his gaze, only a depth beyond anything I had ever known. His eyes were unlike any I had ever seen. They looked straight through me, past my thoughts, my doubts, and my fears. It was as if he could see everything, every wound I had ever carried, every secret I had buried deep within myself. A part of me wanted to speak, to ask where I was, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Then he moved closer. A warmth radiated from him, washing over me in waves. But it wasn't just external. It seeped into my very being, dissolving every fear and every doubt I had spent a lifetime building up. The walls I had carefully constructed around my heart, walls I believed made me strong, made me untouchable, began to crumble. And as they fell, so did I. I dropped to my knees, or at least I felt as if I did. I wasn't even sure if I had a body in this place, but one thing I knew with absolute certainty, I was in the presence of Jesus. That name had never meant much to me before. I had heard it in passing and seen it written on church signs, but I had never considered him real. Yet here he was, more real than anything I had ever experienced. Then he spoke. I had never heard a voice like his before. It wasn't just a sound. It resonated through me, wrapping around every part of who I was. It passed through me like music, but I didn't just hear it. I felt it. Elizabeth. It wasn't just my name. It was a call, a reminder, as if he had known me forever, as if he had been waiting for this moment. My soul trembled at the sound, as if it had recognized him long before I ever existed. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had spent my entire life believing I was in control, that I didn't need anyone. But standing before him, I realized just how small I really was, how little I truly understood. I tried to speak, but all I could manage was a whisper. Am I dead? His expression didn't change. There was no sadness, no pity, only love. A love so vast, so overwhelming, that it consumed every part of me. I had no words. I had always thought of death as the end, the final curtain. But this didn't feel like an ending at all. If anything, it felt like the beginning of something I had never imagined. Before I could ask anything else, everything around us shifted. The darkness that had once surrounded me vanished, replaced by something I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't the world as I had known it, yet it wasn't entirely unfamiliar either. It was vast, endless, and filled with colors unlike anything I had ever seen. The very air seemed to vibrate with a life beyond sound, beyond sight, beyond anything I had ever known. Then I looked down, and I gasped. Beneath me, the earth stretched out like a window into another world. I could still see the hospital. I saw the doctors working on my lifeless body. My neighbor, Jim, is pacing the corridor, hands wringing with worry. And then I saw my mother. She was still awake, clutching an old photograph of us from when I was a child. She had no idea what was happening, no idea that I was watching. But I saw something else too. I saw people I had ignored, people I had hurt. I saw moments in my life where I had chosen anger over kindness, rejection over love. And in that moment, I saw my life as it truly was, not through the lens of my own excuses, but through the lens of truth. Every justification I had ever told myself was stripped away, leaving only reality. I turned to Jesus, my chest heavy with the weight of it all. Why are you showing me this? He didn't need to answer. I already knew. I had been convinced throughout my life that I possessed all the answers. But here, in the presence of absolute truth, I realized how blind I had been. Then he showed me something else, something that made my soul tremble. Everything around us shifted again, but this time it was more than just a glimpse. Earth, as I had known it, was no longer my reality. What stretched before me was something far greater, a vast, infinite expanse of light and warmth, pulsating with a presence beyond comprehension. It was not just a place, but a realm where time did not exist as it did in the world I had left behind. There was no past, no future, only an eternal, unchanging now. Yet, despite the immensity of it all, I felt no fear. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of awe, of being surrounded by something far beyond my understanding. And then I saw them, figures bathed in radiant light, more real than anything I had ever seen, stood before me. They were not simply standing, they were worshiping, but it was unlike any worship I had ever witnessed before. I had only caught glimpses of such moments on television, in passing by church doors, left slightly ajar. But this was different. Their very existence was worship. Every movement, every note of sound resonated in perfect harmony with the presence that filled this place. It wasn't just singing or kneeling. It was pure adoration, a love so overwhelming that it made my knees tremble beneath me. And in that moment, I understood. I was standing at the threshold of heaven. I turned to Jesus, my voice barely audible. Am I supposed to be here? He did not respond immediately. Instead, he extended his hand toward me. And as I reached for it, everything changed. Visions poured into me, not memories, but revelations. Truths I had spent my entire life avoiding now lay bare before me. I saw my existence through a different lens, from a perspective far greater than my own. I saw the moments I had turned away from love, the times I had allowed fear to dictate my choices. I had rejected him, not consciously, not deliberately, but because I had never truly understood who he was. And then I saw the wounds, not just mine, but those I had inflicted, through anger, through indifference, through selfishness. Every scar, every ounce of resentment I had carried had not been because of him. It had been because I had refused to let him in. Tears streamed down my face. I had dedicated my entire life to controlling everything, believing in my own strength. But standing here, in the presence of the very source of life itself, I realized how desperately I had been searching for something, without even knowing what it was. Then, the vision shifted again. I saw people, countless souls, some familiar, some unknown, all wandering, searching, just as I had been. They were lost, looking for something they could not name. And then I saw myself among them. My heart pounded. I understood what this meant. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice trembling. Jesus met my gaze, and in that instant, I felt the answer before he even spoke. A realization settled deep within me. There was still more to do. This was not the end. The feeling came suddenly, a force pulling at me, drawing me back. The light, the presence, the very fabric of heaven itself began to fade. My heart ached at the thought of leaving, but I knew I wasn't meant to stay. Not yet. And before everything vanished, before I was completely pulled away from the holiness of that place, Jesus spoke one final time. His voice wasn't just sound, it was a promise. Tell them. Then the light disappeared, and I was falling, but it wasn't like before, not the terrifying, endless descent into nothingness. This time, I knew where I was going. I gasped as my lungs burned, my body aching as sensation returned. Sounds flooded my ears, machines beeping, hurried voices shouting. The weight of the world settled over me once more. I had returned. I was alive. Continue. I'd like to invite you to be a part of this journey. If you've ever experienced something extraordinary, please share it in the comments. Let us know your name and where you're from. We'll be watching, and in future videos, I'll be giving personal shout-outs. Your name could be mentioned in front of thousands. That will be your opportunity to excel. If you're a part of our incredible community, don't stop reading. If this story moves you, don't forget to like the video. Your support helps us spread these powerful messages to those who need them most. The first thing I felt was a sudden, overwhelming connection to the world. Then, pain. Deep, searing, jolting pain. Like fire, it spread through my entire body. My chest ached as blood surged through my veins, every pulse sending waves of sensation through limbs that felt impossibly heavy. Each breath was a struggle, my lungs burning as if they had been empty for far too long. My head throbbed as though struck by lightning, and above me, the harsh fluorescent hospital lights burned into my retinas. Shapes moved frantically around me, blurred and shifting, their voices filled with urgency, disbelief, and emotion. "She's back!" someone shouted. A nurse rushed out, calling for more help. Footsteps pounded against the floor, and doctors hovered over me, their hands working feverishly. Machines beeped in chaotic rhythm, a symphony of sounds signaling life, fragility, and urgency. I trembled as oxygen was forced into my body. My lungs had been empty, dead, but now I was alive, alive. Memories crashed over me like a tidal wave. The darkness, the fall, the unbearable loneliness, and then the light, the warmth, the presence. Jesus, his words echoed in my mind, wrapping around my soul like an unbreakable bond. Tell them, I tried. I attempted to speak, but my throat was raw and my voice was barely audible. Not only was my body weak, but my recent experience had left me breathless. I had returned, but I was not the same. The individual who had scaled that ladder just hours earlier had vanished. Something inside me had changed, irrevocably. I had undergone a transformation so profound, so absolute, that I could barely grasp it myself. Then the doctor arrived. His expression was one of awe and disbelief. "Elizabeth, can you hear me?" I blinked, nodding weakly. His voice was slow, almost hesitant, as if speaking the words would make them more real. "Your absence lasted for 8 minutes. No pulse, no brain activity. We lost you. 8 minutes." I stared at my hands, trembling, pale, but undeniably alive. And yet, I could still feel it, the remnants of something greater than this world, a whisper of a reality more vivid than anything I had ever known. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid, not of death, not of what lay beyond. But how could I possibly explain what had happened? How could I look these people in the eyes and say, I stood before Jesus Christ? I saw heaven. I was shown the truth I had spent my entire life rejecting. Would they believe me or dismiss it as nothing more than a hallucination, a trick of a dying brain? I thought of my mother. She had clung to her faith even when life had tried to break her. Would she see this as proof of everything she had always believed? Or would she assume I was simply confused, shaken by trauma, grasping for meaning? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I couldn't ignore what had happened. I couldn't go back to who I was before. I had been given a second chance, and now I had to decide what to do with it. The days that followed were a blur. Medical tests, whispered conversations, stolen glances. I listened in silence as doctors spoke in hushed tones outside my hospital room. No oxygen for 8 minutes. She shouldn't have woken up like this. But I had, and nothing would ever be the same again. Nothing made sense. One of the doctors muttered, almost to himself, there should be brain damage, memory loss, something. But there wasn't. I was fine, more than fine. I was different. I sat in the hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling as everything replayed in my mind. The darkness, the endless void that had threatened to consume me, the terror of falling into nothingness until suddenly there was light. His light, Jesus, His presence, His voice, His overwhelming love, the truth that pierced through every wall I had ever built. And then His final words, tell them. I understood now. He wanted me to share what I had seen, to let the world know. Heaven was real. He was real. Eternity existed. But how could I make them believe? Even the few people I trusted, would they listen? I tried speaking to the doctors and to the nurses. They smiled politely, nodding in that way people do when humoring someone who has just woken from a bad dream. It's most likely a trauma response. I overheard one of them say softly, the brain is trying to process everything. I wanted to scream. No, you don't understand. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. But I stayed silent. Doubt crept in. What if they were right? What if my mind had fabricated all of it to shield me from the fear of death? Then a nurse walked in. She was older, kind-eyed, the type of person who carried a quiet wisdom. She adjusted my IV, tucked the blankets around me, and then, just before leaving, she hesitated. She turned back, her voice soft. I don't know what you saw, honey, but I want you to know that sometimes people come back different for a reason. And just like that, the doubt disappeared. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. Jesus had sent me back for a reason. But knowing that and accepting it were two very different things. Because if I told the truth, if I stood up and announced what had happened, I knew the cost. My friends would think I had lost my mind. The people who had always seen me as strong, logical, and independent, they would dismiss me. They would accuse me of brainwashing. That fear had manipulated me. But they were wrong. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was free. And now, I had a choice. I could pretend none of it had happened. I could push it all down, move on, and go back to my life as if I had never glimpsed eternity, never stood before the one who created me. Or I could embrace the truth. I was uncertain about where to begin. I didn't know if I had the courage to stand before the world and share what had been revealed to me. But one thing was certain, my life would never be the same again. Before we finish this journey, I want you to join something bigger. We don't share these stories for money. We do it because they matter, because people need to hear them, because you need to know the truth. If this resonates with you, please click the like button and consider subscribing to this channel. It may seem like a small action, but it makes a difference, more than you realize. It helps us reach more people, spread more hope, and remind the world that there is something greater beyond this life. Join our community. We are in this together. The day I was discharged from the hospital, the world seemed different. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and yet nothing around me looked the same. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I stepped outside and breathed in the fresh air for the first time. It should have felt liberating, but instead, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Tell him. Jesus' words echoed in my soul. I had spent my entire life avoiding faith, pushing away anything that required belief in something beyond what I could see, touch, or control. But after what I had experienced, there was no denying it. He existed. Heaven existed. Everything I thought I knew about life and death had been shattered in an instant. And now I had a choice. I walked down the hospital steps, gripping the small bag that held my belongings. The discharge papers were signed. I should have felt relief. Instead, a battle raged inside me. I understood the consequences of speaking the truth. People would whisper. They would talk behind my back, shake their heads, and call me delusional. But I couldn't stay silent. I had seen eternity. I had stood in the presence of the one who created me. There was a purpose behind my return. I thought of my mother, how she had spent years praying for me, believing in me. I had once dismissed her faith as nothing more than wishful thinking. But now, I wish she had been there to see. She had suffered. I had watched her struggle. And yet, she never lost faith in God. For the first time, I understood why. I had spent so much of my life avoiding pain, rejecting the idea that I needed anyone. I had believed my independence was a strength, but in truth, I had built a prison for myself, one so high that even God had to break through to reach me. And he didn't do it with force. He did it with love. I reflected on my time there, the warmth, the overwhelming peace beyond human comprehension. I wanted that again, not just for myself, but for everyone. Slowly, I pulled out my phone. My heart pounded as I stared at the blank screen. Was I really going to do this? I took a deep breath. Then I began to type. I did not possess all the answers. I didn't know what the future held, but I was certain of one thing. I couldn't remain silent. I had been granted another opportunity, and I was determined not to let it slip away. This is only the beginning. What I have to share next is even more powerful, and you don't want to miss it. The video you're about to see could transform your life. And before you go, let's do something together. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in the message we are sharing, take a moment to hit the like button and type Amen in the comments. Let's keep the blessing going. God is working in your life, and this is just the beginning. I'll see you in the next video.